Hello and welcome to the Talking City podcast from the Manchester Evening News. I'm your host today, Rich Fay, joined as always by Simon Bajkowski. You'll be delighted to know we'll be talking FFP because that's the only subject anyone cares about these days. But first we'll be looking at Kalvin Phillips, his future. We'll also be looking at any injury updates from Abu Dhabi and a little bit of a discussion ahead of City's trip to face Tottenham, of course, next week. Just a pointer as well. We will be back on Monday for a more extensive look at that and potentially next Wednesday as well ahead of City's trip to face Tottenham on the Friday night. Si, how are you doing?
All right, all the better for seeing you.
Thank God. I love to hear that. All the better for talking about FFP for another podcast.
Yeah. It was. I was delighted to do it on Wednesday, and then it seems like we've got a bit more to talk about. Stefan on TalkSport doing a hell of a job, really, in explaining things.
Yeah, I was got to say we could easily have just sort of copy and pasted Wednesday's chatting to here, but I guess there is enough to bring it forward. So yeah, I guess
I mean, everyone's sort of focused on the wrong bit from Stefan's talk with TalkSport. Really, I can see why, because former Man City advisor says Man City will be relegated if most serious charges are proven. Is a bit of a much sexier headline than former Man City advisor thinks Man City will get off most serious charges. But I think it's sort of the strongest anyone sort of with such background has been in saying that they think City will get off the charges, or the most serious ones. So it was quite an interesting listen.
Yeah, like you said, that it does depend which way you want to twist it, because if you're not a Man City outlet, the sexy headline is Man City are relegated. Sort of, what is it? Sort of damned United, you won all these with cheating, counts for nothing, you've ruined everything.
Yeah.
But if you look at it from a more neutral point of view and without your sort of, maybe if you read agenda or whatever, it is basically saying, look, they would be if it's proven guilty, but they most likely probably won't be proven guilty, or there's a likelihood that might not happen anyway. So it is sort of the way that maybe it's more of a reflection of the way that wider media who aren't a Man City outlet report Man City. Yeah,
and I think sort of the less involved you are in a case or a subject matter, than sort of the less you're going to know, and so sort of I think
that's my role.
I'm sure Stefan wouldn't mind me saying this, but we've been talking about City could be relegated or expelled from the league since the very first day that charges were brought in February 23. I'm pretty sure Stefan will have been saying that from day one, so we know it. The fact he said it on TalkSport isn't a separate thing, but what hasn't been spoken about really is the how difficult it will be for the Premier League to prove these charges. And obviously someone with such a background in that will be, better placed to say that than you or I. You or I can say it and have said it, but to hear it so cogently from someone with the experience that they've got is interesting. I think we kind of, I was involved a bit. Obviously, Stu was around at the time, so that was kind of leading stuff for the CAS coverage. But, there was so much coverage around CAS and what City were going to get. And, the only kind of big article, there was one outlet that went big and said City wouldn't get, City would be punished and it'd be a 1-year ban. And then that wasn't proven correct. So I think it kind of became clear around all the CAS coverage that this is like out of the depth of many, your bog standard football reporting. It's not really looking at sort of who scored which goal and who gave him the assist and who's in form. It's an entirely different world. And it's been hard as sort of someone who's used to writing those match reports to get your head around everything that's going on. And
you're quite good at saying who scored goals and stuff, aren't you? That's your area of expertise.
I've improved at working out who scores goals. Yeah. I
guess that's the whole point, isn't it? It is that a lot of the chat and a lot of discussion, and a lot of the actual case is beyond most people to actually to drive an actual opinion or give proper insight on it. And of course, there's obviously just so much to still decide with it all, and there's still so many cogs and so much mitigation to it all. There's so many different loopholes, different various stages it has to get to as well. And then, I mean, yeah, it is. I mean, how do you find actually talking about it on a sort of daily basis? As a reporter, do you find it tedious at this point, or still interesting? I mean, it's like I said, because it's driven quite a lot from external outlets who don't maybe cover City in depth day to day. It's one of the only ways that sort of City do get coverage often, isn't it? Is because they're so good on the pitch that the off the field issues are maybe more appealing to wider fans.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it will be of no surprise to you, but I'm a bit of a nerd, so I quite enjoy this kind of thing, and it is refreshing to take something on that is slightly different from your daily football life. And you know, it's really interesting speaking to Stefan and other people who have kind of a legal background with interest in the case, or an academic background with interest in the case. And also, you know, these charges are unprecedented, so nobody knows what's going to happen, really. All you can do is kind of give it your best educated guess based on your, you know, information. And it's been a learning curve to try and build up that pack of information. I'm aware that as kind of City reporter for the MEN, I will have covered these things in more detail than most. And so I kind of understand why there are still sort of certain tropes thrown about you. Oh, City were guilty at CAS anyway, and things like that. But it's sort of slightly frustrating that, so, you know, City were fined at CAS, but they were fined for not cooperating with an investigation that the court ruled, you know, City had merit in saying that there were leaks coming out. So why would you cooperate with an investigation that you thought was flawed and was leaking, and you were fairly sure was leaking against you? I'm always a bit on edge about talking about this kind of stuff, just because I don't know it, you know, in the same way that I would be unsure about talking about, you know, how Tiger Woods won his 13th major, because I couldn't even tell you which course it was. So it's none of us like to speak about things that we know nothing about. And the challenge,
when it's a subject like this, it is so, like you said, unprecedented and so above and beyond football and what happens on the pitch, that to make quite a bold statement on it, you need to be watertight, don't you, as well, from a sort of journalistic point of view. You can't just be throwing accusations, or this guy told me this, so it might be true. They can't be, because like even in a jovial sense, in sort of transfers, if an agent tells you something that might not be 100% true, you could kind of still run it and say, well, he told me this. But with a legal case like this, you would have to have it from a number of different sources, and you would have to be certain, because of the role you're in and because of the sort of legality of it all, that anything you throw forward would have to be watertight, wouldn't it, as well? Which I think sometimes isn't always, maybe sometimes from the outside, people don't kind of realise that look, there's a hell of a lot on the line here as well in terms of what you can report. So sometimes you can see why when someone's asked to do a story on it, and like you said, they might not have full sort of details or insight or even a new angle on the story, they might repeat some of these previous sort of tropes and trivial sort of bits that aren't quite accurate on it as well. And it's sort of all sort of snowballs into sort of pushing this agenda that doesn't really exist, or pushing this narrative that's not really there as well.
Yeah, I think there are two aspects to it. I think the first aspect is you do need a lot of checks, and I think, you know, there are a lot of people who have maybe alluded to the fact that it will be hard for the Premier League to claim to sort of prove the most pressing, the most serious claims, and I kind of include myself in that. But it's another thing to say, therefore, I think City will get off, because, you know, I wouldn't necessarily be confident enough to have, be able to say that based on prior knowledge and information and background and everything like that. And I think, certain other figures would and have done similar. So in that respect, that's why I say like Stefan's gone further than anyone, and absolutely fair play to him with his expertise, and it's nice to see him sort of getting the attention for the work he's put in, because he has put so much work into this kind of stuff. I think the other thing is just maybe a case of people need to, if you are a leading voice or a big voice in the debate, then you need to kind of understand, say, the cast situation, why City got fined or something like that. That's an obvious one where it's like, yeah, but they were guilty. And it's like, well, no, they paid a fine for, non-cooperation, but you need to understand why and what non-cooperation means and those kind of things before you then just say City are guilty. So I think there's a few kind of broad strokes that are sort of, smear the overall picture, but also it is just very, very hard for anyone to get a handle on everything. It takes time. I saw John Cross, the Mirror's reporter, saying, if you're commenting on Everton or whatever, read the 100-page document that sets out exactly what they did or what the panel thinks they did, because it will make a difference in how you judge things. But it does take time, and for many people, they just kind of accept summaries or what someone else has said, and these kind of stories are useful in kind of reaffirming that you really do need to sort of look at these things yourself, and B, it is really helpful to take advice from people who know more about these things than you.
Well, I think that is probably all for part one today. We are doing a bit of a condensed podcast because nothing's really happened this week. But we will be back after the short break to bring you all the latest transfer news, and as we said, the latest from Abu Dhabi as well. Welcome back to the Talking City podcast then from the Manchester Evening News. That's enough for FFP for this week at least. Like I said, we're back on Monday where you can get more of that from Simon. I know he's eager to talk about FFP once again. He also loves to talk about Kalvin Phillips though. If you had to name your two special subjects on Mastermind, it would be FFP followed by Kalvin Phillips. What's the latest on him then, Si? West Ham, the latest team linked with a move. City aren't just in the market to get rid of him for free. They're not just going to write him off. They still need someone to match that valuation of him. Obviously, he's got his personal interest in leaving the club ahead of the European Championship to try get an England place solidified. But what is the latest on him? Can you still see him leaving in the sort of next week and a half?
I think I sort of more expecting him to leave now than I was maybe on Monday. Monday, it kind of felt a bit like, I don't know if he'll end up staying, because will anyone pay the fees? And City don't have too much kind of motivation to get rid of him. Interest has picked up a bit this week, despite Newcastle sort of drawing a line in the sand. Even Newcastle drawing a line in the sand, it's a bit of gamesmanship. It's a bit of, we're not going to do terms on the current terms, which there's every chance that the current terms could be moved. So in which case you will do business. So I think at the start of the month he was expected to go. I think over the past few weeks it's kind of been a bit of movement towards that, or not as much progress was made as had been hoped, because this is a guy that wants to play and solidify his place to the Euros, so kind of it's on him to get a move as soon as possible. So it's a bit weird that he's still around January the 19th, but that I suppose speaks to the complications of sort of pleasing three parties in a deal.
Yeah. Fresh transfer news as well. I know this is only sort of a tidbit, but you wrote today that City could potentially land a little bit of a windfall if Morgan Rogers goes to Aston Villa.
Yeah. They sold him, bought him in 2019 for $4 million. They sold him to Middlesbrough last summer for significantly less than $4 million. But they do have quite a sort of relatively big sell-on fee, which they tend to do when they sell youngsters for low fees. They did it with Diran Mabudi this summer as well. When it's a low sort of fee up front, they tend to put a big sell on. So yeah, news broke, I think, on Thursday night that Aston Villa want to sign Rodgers. So if Aston Villa do sign him from Middlesbrough, then City will get a small chunk, and Ferran Soriano will count every penny of it.
Yeah, again, it's sort of evidence of the money-making machine City have turned their academy into, isn't it? I know we've spoken about the massive fees, but even those who don't go for sort of these headline figures, there's still good business being done there in saying, look, we can let them go cheap now, and there's the potential to earn that back really in the future if you do so, which is another one of those. I mean, I'm not even going to get you to sort of comment on the signing of Mexican youth international Alex Alcala from LA Galaxy, but again, City making these sort of little strides in the future. Look forward to seeing where he ends up in maybe 2 or 3 years. Again, there's always intrigue, I think, whenever a club signs a youth player, particularly someone, from that you're just not aware of really. And I don't think there'll be many City fans who could give you an insight or a steer on Alex Alcala. Probably not many LA Galaxy fans either who could do that. In terms of the injury front then side, I mean, Ederson is the one that sort of dictates the majority of the chat at the moment. I know, I mean, even from a sort of insight point of view, I was maybe a bit surprised to see how much interest there was in that injury update on him after the Newcastle game anyway, in terms of most read stories. I mean, it was one of the most read stories the MEN sort of did that weekend, was its Ederson update, because it is so interesting to, I suppose, fantasy football league fans as well as Man City fans. But what is the latest on City's injury front?
Yeah, I think they're still assessing him. I think because he's had his time off. So City players were off after the Newcastle game until they've all met up in Abu Dhabi last night. So I think he will be assessed today, and they will then determine it. I mean, he was on the plane to go out to Abu Dhabi. So I think if it was sort of really, really serious, he wouldn't be out there. There was hope on Saturday when he did it that it was just a knock and a bad impact injury. I think there was a picture of it that looked like it was sort of a very bad flesh wound, which is bad, but isn't as bad as kind of a muscle strain or tear or anything. Kind of
reminds me of sort of Monty Python saying it's a flesh wound. Was that was it the Knights who say knee, or who was that? Was it the White Knight or someone who had all his limbs cut off and said each of them were a flesh wound?
You've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look, just a flesh wound.
He's definitely got all his limbs attached. If that's the exclusive piece of transfer news you want from the MEN, we can give you that. Do you personally see him sort of even being risked then maybe for that Tottenham game in a week's time? What do you think anyway? Because it's a cup game. Maybe Ortega.
I think Ortega plays because it's a cup game, and maybe Ortega plays Burnley. The thing is, he is a trusted number 2. You don't want Ederson to be injured, but Ortega is kind of one of the most reliable keepers you could have backing up. The problem with Newcastle is that no one wants to change a goalkeeper mid-game. So, yeah, I can't see it being too serious, but there is that cover there with Ortega.
I guess finally as well on that Tottenham game, City sold out the maximum allocation for the game in just a day. There'll be about 9,000 Blues there at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I mean, it's a really compelling time. I know, like I said, we'll get into that more in detail next week, probably just because it's on Monday and if there's a Wednesday podcast as well. But it's a really fascinating one, that side, isn't it? And I suppose, do you think that's almost just as tough a tie as City could have got given the Tottenham hoodoo, or do you think they'll be relishing the chance to finally win there and to finally sort of get one over them?
I think both. And, I think if they win it, it will be seen within the camp and outside the camp as, a major hurdle overcome in their attempts to win trophies this season, especially with, Arsenal going out in the third round and one of Chelsea or Villa's going out in the next round. I'm just about to speak to John Macken, actually, the goal scorer in that famous FA Cup comeback. And I was just looking this morning, and City didn't win a league game in that season between November and March, I don't think so.
Probably the most underrated FA Cup comeback of all times, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, like 3-0 down at half time and down to 10 men. I remember watching it was amazing.
So will we get that piece before next week?
That will be on the website before next week, with a few extra voices.
Lovely. John Macker, my first ever signing on Pro Evo 4, I think, when I started with the default players. So a legend in my eyes. I hope you do pass that message on. But that is all for today's Talking City podcast. As always, please do leave a review, a 5-star review as well, if possible. Like I said, we will be back on Monday for a more comprehensive look at all the City news. That's all from me, Rich Fay. Thank you very much, Si, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I never get to leave.
Take care, and Si will be here until Monday. Take care. We'll see you again next time.